started. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Hope everybody's doing good. It's so nice to see everybody here. Nice, we got a good number of folks here today. So I figured so this is number like 13 or 14, I think. I can't quite remember exactly. I forgot how many Q&As. It says 13 on the thing, but I think there were a couple that I accidentally either forgot to hit the record button. I think there were a couple of those, so that's my bad. But yeah, Dave, I know you. Yeah, 13 for sure. But I know it. I think there were a couple that I forgot to record. With that said, the way I kind of like to start this stuff out nowadays is I really like to just kind of give everyone a bit of a primer, like a little, here's what I'm up to at the moment. Here's what's going on here, and then we can. People, there's a few ways we can do this. People can put questions in the chat for me to hit. And also we will, I'll open it up so people can just ask a question verbally. So if you go under the reactions button, you can it'll give you the option to raise your hand if you have a question. And then we can just kind of get the ball rolling. Give me just 1 second. I want to clean off my computer screen really quick because I think it's a little foggy. I think I've got some maybe hand lotion or something smeared on there. So give me just 1 second. Let's see if this helps. Oh yeah, that's better. Nice. Right. Sweet. Okay, so just let me get the last little bit of this off of here. Awesome. Let's see. So, what's going on here? Well, at the moment, there have been with the first few clutches of ornates have hatched this year. At the next, I don't know, 2-3 weeks are probably going to have the majority of Euros, not all of them, but like a lot of Euros are going to be hatching here in the next few weeks. There's so many clutches that were laid kind of all around the same time frame. Everything from there's some Princeps, Yemenensis, Ornata, et cetera. A few of these all just kind of in the same realm, or same time frame rather. I've got eggs coming through I still have a couple more ornates actually left to lay eggs, but I've got Xenogama and Whiptails and a handful of other bizarre projects that are all starting to kind of get moving and get the ball rolling. So things are getting kind of crazy here. And I think with the way the summer's going to roll, I think it's going to be pretty chaotic for a little while, but thankfully, I feel relatively prepared, and I've got a pretty good basis set up over here, and things seem to be moving kind of in the way that I want them to go. Sorry if you guys hear the sirens going. There's for some reason there's a lot of noise over here at the moment. But so that's been pretty fun. I have been doing a little bit of herping locally here in Colorado, just to try to get out and see a few things and take a little bit of a break from the day-to-day, because the day-to-day can be really crazy and chaotic here sometimes. Got married last week, which is really super cool and fun for me. Super exciting day in general. And then for a few days after that, Rach and I took a vacation to Mount Princeton Hot Springs here and just sort of took a little bit of a break from everything. We don't have a proper honeymoon until August. We're going to go to Costa Rica for a few days and enjoy that. But other than that, that's kind of what's going on here. There's a handful of other things that I really want to announce and like share with people, but it's just not time for it yet. It's not time yet. There's still too many things for me to kind of try to work out and figure out and whatnot. But I will say one thing that I have changed my tune on a little bit over the last year and a half is insects for Uromastyx. And there's a few reasons I've changed my tune on this. So some of you might recall that on my care guide, I have it noted that I say something along the lines of, oh, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with feeding the occasional insect to Uromastyx, but to me, it's clear that they don't need it. And I have changed my tune on that for various reasons. The first being, I think I said that statement prematurely. I said that with, you know, a certain amount of experience and time under my belt, but I think until I've really had many generations and many more seasons than I've had. I mean, I've had like 12 or so, maybe almost 13-ish seasons of hatching Uromastyx. I don't think that's enough to really say that statement confidently. I have been rereading Thomas Wilms's book on Uromastyx, and I recall that he actually recommends feeding adults insects at various points. And most importantly, I recall the field study that was cited in that book in which a juvenile Moroccan Uromastyx had as much as 75% insect matter in their gut. Now, I say all of this with a little bit of trepidation because I don't like the idea that it's hard to teach people about moderation and control. And what I don't want to do is start spreading this word around and get people, cause people to start, offering all kinds of bugs to their Uromastyx on a daily basis. I think that the feeding of insects should be something like dry food, where it's sparing, it's treat based, and it's seasonal. So I think it's the kind of thing that should happen in the spring and summer months when animals are at their peak functioning, highest metabolic rate, cooking on all, like just firing on all cylinders sort of thing. And I think it should be limited mostly to mealworms, both superworms and small mealworms. I think those are the kinds of things that they should get. And I think they should get it relatively sparingly, say once or maybe anywhere from 2 to 3 times a month, and only from spring to summer. The other reason I've started doing this is because there was a long time where I would present insects to my Uros years ago, many years ago, maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, and half of them wouldn't even look at them. They would ignore them. They wouldn't want to eat them. They wouldn't even bother. And that was what I failed to recognize at the time is that I was doing that in the fall. And that is maybe not the right time to get the kind of food response that you might expect out of those animals. With that said, what I've done recently, so some of this was inspired by, if I'm not mistaken, it's rhino iguanas, which people sort of famously think is the quintessential herbivore. There is a yearly bloom of moths that hatch in the Dominican Republic. There's a paper on this that was sent to me by a friend or cited to me by a friend. And once a year, there's this huge bloom of moths, and the caterpillars for all these moths are purple. And the rhino iguanas, which everyone is insistent that they don't have any kind of insect or animal matter in their diet, get purple faces from eating all the caterpillars and just engulfing them all once a year, just gorging themselves on those things. I have friends who keep tortoises in Arizona that eat dead birds that fall into the pens where they're kept wild, that eat rodents that end up in the pens. So a lot of this stuff has inspired me to give it a try. So then what I did is at the beginning of spring this year, I started taking dusted mealworms and super mealworms, and I wandered around the shop and I put these mealworms in the field of view of all the Uromastyx. And I tell you, to a letter, to every single animal went absolutely apeshit for these mealworms and superworms. And it was remarkable. I had never seen anything quite like that. I've never seen such a vigorous response. This is from animals that are wild caught, that haven't seen an insect other than anything that crawls into their pen in 10 years. This is captive bred individuals that have never seen an insect in my care. This is individuals across species from Ornata, Princeps, Yemenensis, Thomasi, Nigroventris, Aegyptia. I mean, you name it. And all of that to say, I think that this is something that I'm going to start incorporating into my care protocols. Not even I'm going to start, I have started incorporating into my care protocols here in the warmer months. Now, I should also say that there are other individuals who have done this periodically for years. So my good buddy, Camille Hammers over in the Netherlands, you guys all know him. He has, I know for a fact, he has periodically offered insects to some of his animals. Now, I don't know if he does it anymore. I don't want to speak to his methods or anything because he's his own person and he's a good friend of mine and I respect anything and everything he does. But I know that over the years, he has done it from time to time with species such as Princeps. And so I know that. Also, I should say that Scott Wilson, who some of you might know in California, and the guy who's sort of well known for propagating the hypo-ornate Uromastyx, he has fed mealworm pupa from small mealworms when they pupate to all of his Uros for more than a decade, for a long time. And I used to kind of just write that off as just sort of okay, interesting, whatever, and didn't really think about it. But I think maybe I didn't give that the credit that he deserved for doing that on the regular. And then last but not least, back when I was in college, early college, there was a gentleman named Ed Carr. And if any of you were ever participating on the kingsnake.com forums back in the day, you will recognize him as the username Art Gecko, and the owner of Grover, who was a very well-known Egyptian Uromastyx that was 32 inches long, and his back was covered with an untreatable fungal disease that had just left him with all these white scars across his back. But anyway, he was the first person who I had ever seen who hatched Egyptian Uromastyx, and he would feed the baby Egyptians mealworms once a week. And that was how he gave them their calcium and multivitamin supplementation. And he never put any on the greens. So I guess all of this is just to say that I've changed my tune on this, and it's something that I'm going to get a little bit more vocal about in the future. I have some other reasons to mention this that I can't quite talk about yet, just because it's not my place to say. Whenever this stuff is published and happens, then I can talk more about some of this stuff that I can't really share because it's not my, I've been asked not to talk a lot about this yet just because there's stuff upcoming, right? So I can't say much, but I think this is going to become a more prominent thing. And I have long said, and I think I said in the intro in my care guide, that I will regularly update my methods. And then when that happens, I'll update the care guide in an effort to just sort of reflect the fact that what I'm doing here is a changing document. It's a changing, I'm always trying to grow and change and revise what I do for one reason or another. So kind of wanted to start with that. And now I'd like to go ahead and say, I'd love to ask if anybody has any questions. Whether there were ones that people had kind of coming into this, if you had any particular questions, or if any of you had any particular questions around the insect thing or the bug thing, I'd love to talk about it a little bit more. But if you have a question, you can either type it into the chat here, or if you go under the reactions button, you can hit the button that says raise hand, and that will let me know that you have a question. And I'll just kind of say, all right, this person first, and then I'll unmute you if you do in fact have a question. But you know, I think this stuff is pretty important. You know, I think that as time goes along, and as I'll have been doing this for longer and longer and longer every single year that goes by, I think it's only natural for a lot of this stuff to change, you know. And I have said before that I try to wait a while before I tell anybody, like, here's what you should do, you know. And so I still would like to kind of hold to that and say, I don't necessarily have a great protocol for like how much you should or should not be giving to Euros, right? And I also still think it's probably fair that if you take the stance that Euros don't require insects of any kind, then it's totally fine if you don't offer them. I think that's no problem whatsoever. I don't think that this is like a requirement per se. It might be, it might be long term, but I don't really know. So I think this is like a fascinating topic. I'm very, very interested in this. But anyway, I'll go ahead and stop talking. Any questions out there? Anybody throw up the hand? Anything anybody want to say? Oh yeah, Dave, for sure. Yeah, if there's bugs on the flowers and they eat those insects, the ants. Yep, that happens for sure. Years and years ago, I had in the basement of my family's home, I watched more than one ornate Uromastyx run and eat a spider that I saw crawl through the cage. And I saw that happen more than once. It was pretty remarkable. Melissa says, what's your opinion on keeping Euros in bioactive enclosures, specifically with plants and cleanup crew? Okay, so great question. Roy and I actually just recently recorded a podcast with a gentleman who has very, very strong opinions about the term bioactive and how bioactive is misused in herpetoculture. And so with regard to plants and cleanup crew, because I don't want to butcher his words, that episode will come out this Friday, and I highly recommend that all of you listen to it. It's Project Herpetoculture. It's on the Animals at Home Network. You can find that on Spotify, iTunes, all that stuff. So I'll let him speak for himself with regard to what bioactive is and is not, and what all that means, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on keeping Uromastyx in enclosures with plants and a cleanup crew, I think there's a lot of things here. I'll start with the cleanup crew. I have never seen anybody do this successfully. I've never seen it happen. I've never seen a good example of this. I think that in order to keep a cleanup crew alive in an enclosure that is suited for Uromastyx, it requires you to have exceptionally deep substrate, because those cleanup crew organisms need to be able to burrow down sufficiently far to escape the heat and dryness that is required for a Uromastyx enclosure, right? So I think that just in general, flat out makes it prohibitive for most people keeping Uromastyx, because most people are not keeping their animals in an enclosure that's sufficiently deep to allow for that kind of thing. If you were to do so, that would present other problems, because as soon as you have an enclosure in which it's deep enough for a Uromastyx to create a burrow, you then have to manage the risks associated with having a burrow in the enclosure. Now, obviously, I don't think Euros are dumb. It's not like I think the Euro is going to be causing any problems or hazards to itself. What's going to happen is you then have to have the appropriate substrate at the appropriate depth and at the appropriate moisture content to sufficiently hold a burrow, so that way the burrow doesn't collapse on them, so that way all the furnishings and stones that sit on top of that soil don't collapse onto the Euro. And you also run the risk of having that Euro dig into a burrow and disappear in a way that you can't easily access the animal when it needs care, or when you need to take it out for some reason, or if you have to move or whatever. So it's not bad. It's not necessarily a terrible thing to do, but I do think it's all trade-offs, right? So it's all different, trade-offs in terms of what you're going to do and not do. Right. So yeah, if you're doing the same thing for your bearded dragons don't want it anywhere near as hot and dry as a Euro does. So they're going to have maybe an easier time, but especially with a foot deep of substrate, that's great. So if you want to experiment with doing it with a Uromastyx, that's great. But I just want to say that I've never seen anybody do it. I've never seen it done properly. I've never seen it done consistently for any length of time. And it would be great to see it happen. That'd be super cool. Secondarily, the plant question. So that presents you with other problems as well. You must have a sufficiently heat tolerant plant, which that part's not necessarily hard to do, but then you have to make sure that it is non-toxic in the event that the Uromastyx decides to eat that plant, which also maybe not terribly hard to do. And then you also have to deal with the fact that in a confined space, it's very likely that that plant will be trampled on the regular by a Uromastyx because it only has so much within the enclosure to explore, play around with, et cetera, et cetera. So I've never done it, but that's more because I am terrible with plants. I have the opposite of a green thumb. I'm really bad with it. So I've never done it for that reason, but I've also very rarely seen it done successfully with Uromastyx. That said, here at the Denver Zoo, there is an exhibit that periodically contains Xenogama taylori, Uromastyx yemenensis, and Egyptian tortoises, and I think they rotate them and sometimes cohabitate them. And if I'm not mistaken, there are some live desert succulents inside that exhibit. With that said, it's a pretty substantial exhibit. So there's lots of space, and I mean a lot of space, and there's lots of sort of keeper interference in the enclosure, and the Uromastyx are not in there constantly. So it means that when they rotate the Uromastyx out and put the Xenogama taylori in, it means that there's just not that much going on in terms of, hang on, sorry. Oh, sorry, I thought somebody's coming in my back door. It means that the plants have some time to recover while the Uromastyx are not trampling on all the plants, right? So there's that. But again, I think these are all things that should be tried, and I'd love to see someone successfully do it. However, I will say that in general, there's a very high likelihood that you would need a combination of incredibly resilient, heat-tolerant, non-toxic plants, coupled with a massive enclosure, and I mean massive, like I'm gonna guess 8-foot minimum. That way you have sufficient heat gradients and sufficient moisture gradients to allow those plants to survive. So if you can, go for it. That'd be awesome. But I will say that I don't have strong conviction that it can be done casually in the same way that it can be done, say, for smaller species, less heat required species. I think it's a taller order in some regard with Uromastyx, but it's a great question. And I'd love to see it again. I'd love to see it done. It would be really cool. Yeah, of course. Happy to answer, happy to share. It's funny. There are certain things that people will ask me about from time to time. One of those is the sort of cleanup crew slant to herpetoculture. The other is outdoor keeping. And surely I have my thoughts and opinions on those things, but I should just reiterate that I've never done either of those things. I've never kept anything outside, and I've never tried a Euro with a cleanup crew. I've never given it a go. Now, all of that said, I don't think one needs to have participated in that pursuit to have criticisms of it, because, for example, the outdoor thing, I think keeping outdoors is an awesome idea. But I definitely know that there are some drawbacks, right? So in captivity, you're inside and indoors anyway, you're having to balance heat, light, humidity, daylight hours, ventilation. You deal with all this stuff. And when you make the trade-off in going outdoors with a reptile, you sacrifice the electricity bill, you sacrifice the challenges in providing even heat gradients and UVB, all that stuff goes out the window. But what you get in exchange for that is the challenge of weather and natural disaster, right? And when you're dealing with a captive reptile, natural disaster takes on a whole new definition, because it's not just, you know, a big storm or a landslide. Something as simple as rain, high wind, high heat, all of this stuff becomes a real threat to your animal, and that you have to mitigate, and you have to be highly responsive, and you can't be as hands-off as people can be when you're keeping indoors. The other thing that you get in exchange for sacrificing your electricity bill is you get you're very likely to get an animal that's not super friendly to you, right? Because Uromastyx are going to revert back to, oh shit, it's wild, I got to be careful, right? Because they're not just looking out for you, they're looking out for hawks and all these other things that they're going to see, that they are going to interpret, rightfully so, as a threat. The other thing you're getting in exchange is the worry of external natural parasites, not necessarily gut parasites, but mites, ticks, these sorts of things. You're also going to have to deal with native predators, whether that's, you know, like if you're doing it in Arizona or the American Southwest, you have to worry about scorpions that can get into your enclosure, and then they're a hazard to you as well as to your Euro. You have to deal with snakes, you have to deal with raccoons, coyotes, foxes, birds of prey. All of these things will get into your enclosure, and it can get into your enclosure in some way. And so in the same way that there's a trade-off when you move indoors to outdoors, there's a trade-off when you move, let's say, naturalistic or at best sort of entry-level cage keeping into cleanup crews, live plants, more of like a living vivarium. There's huge trade-offs, and I think they're really great challenges for people. I think it's really fun and very interesting when I see people tackle those challenges in the same way they might tackle, say, a freshwater or saltwater aquarium. I think it's awesome. But I do think we are at least in the nascent stages of how to understand those processes in the context of herpetoculture as opposed to marine tanks or freshwater tanks. Yeah, so that's a great question, Melissa. I love that. Everybody else, anybody else out here with a question or a thought or anything they want to throw in here? That way I don't seem like the only one up here flapping my jaws about nothing up here. Oh man, nobody's got it. Oh, okay, here we go. All right, cool. Hunter, let's go, dude. Go. You're muted there, Hunter.
There we go. You hear me?
Yep, there we go.
Beautiful. One of your newer Patreon guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I have been a Chuck Wallet enthusiast for a long time, and it's nice seeing you get back into with the granite pair and everything. And how are they doing for you right now?
Oh, they're great. Oh yeah, I love Chucks. Always have.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm more Chuck Wallet oriented than Uromastyx, but I've been getting back into them recently. One of my buddies, Jeff Schwartz, I think you might have spoken to him a few times. Yep. He just bought 2 of your Princeps a while ago, and I'm planning on, hopefully when you have Yemenensis available, I'll get some bent eyes from you and stuff, and looking to breed more, because right now I'm moving towards ornates, Yemenensis. I have a Thomasai from Exotics. And I know you've mentioned it once or twice before about newer animals being bred. I'm always the kind of guy that when I get a new Uromastyx, I let it sell in for like a year or two, let it relax a little bit. I think a lot of people end up rushing breeding. They want to get like immediate return on investment, and they're like, oh yeah, I want to breed these animals, and they end up stressing out the animal really badly.
Sure.
And, we know how fragile females are. What is when you acquire new animals, if you do often, how long do you wait until you breed them? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it more of a gauge it by the animal's behaviors kind of situation? Like, how do you usually do it?
Whoops. Right. Sorry, hang on. I just lost the little note card. Whoa. Weird. Okay. Oh yeah. So great question. Let me before I answer, let me just say a couple of things really fast. Specifically, Joe, to what you said here, that you've been feeding insects on a weekly basis for a long time. You didn't mention anything because you didn't want to get blasted in the groups. Totally get that. There's a lot of things in the groups that I really, really very much disagree with. Bugs are one of them. Soaking is one of them. There's lots of things there. So I think we should all speak our mind. And if somebody has a problem with it, that's their problem, right? We can all have differing opinions and still respect each other and treat each other well. I don't think that matters at all. But the fact that the group, specifically Euro Club on Facebook, which I am an admin of, believe it or not, the fact that there are rules in there that will pull you out of the group if you just go against what the group thinks is the best possible way of going about it. I think there's a line to be drawn with some situations, but some of that stuff drives me nuts. I also just want to say that I made a mistake, which is I let my Zoom subscription lapse. So I have 7 minutes left on this on this Q&A before it's going to cut us off. So Hunter, I'm going to answer your question. And then if anybody else has a question that maybe I won't be able to get to, just DM me, or either on Instagram or on Patreon. I'll answer your question. And then when we do the next Q&A, I will have re-upped my Zoom subscription so we can do unlimited time limit on the meetings. So that's my bad. Now, Hunter, to answer your question, my preference is to wait a full year. So if I receive an animal in January, I don't breed it again until the next January, so that's very important to me. And I think it's one of those things where it tries people's patience, obviously. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. I've got like a friend of mine, he's in the Patreon, Dan Francis over in the UK. He's he got a clutch of ornate eggs from a female that he acquired earlier this year. And like, I think a few of them failed, but I think a few of them are still going and will probably hatch. I think that's the rare exception. And it was one he grabbed locally, right? So it wasn't like, I think a lot of it happens when shipping occurs, because shipping is a greater stress on an animal than not. Again, I don't think this is cut and dry. I don't think it's every single time. I just think the majority of the time, if you push it and try to breed them too soon, you're going to end up with bad results. And with Euros, it's a pretty high cost, because if they have I've had animals in the past where I tried to breed them much too soon, and they never bred properly after that for years and years and years. So in my mind, it's just not worth the risk. Like, why does it have to happen this year? What's the rush? What's the big deal? Why not just let it go one season? We're talking one season in the lifetime of a Euro that is anywhere from 30 up to 50 plus years of life. Who cares if a single season is skipped, right? And with that said, I think it also depends on the source. So if you bought locally and all you did was drive 30 minutes to go pick something up and then bring it back to your place, it's probably not as much of a stress on the animal. It's probably not going to freak them out so much. If you live in California and you got it shipped from New York, maybe you're going to have to give it a little bit more time, because you're dealing with many, many, many more factors in the stress of that animal, right? So I think those are things to consider. I think, the other thing you want to do is so you guys all know that I pretty much keep all my Euros almost across the board. They're solo for almost the entire year, except during breeding season. Everybody in this group should know that, because that's my thing. I don't think cohabbing Euros is the move. That said, I think that if you get animals from someone who does cohab their Euros, then it's even more important that you wait, keep them solo, and see what happens, because you don't have any way of verifying that that animal has not been under an inordinate amount of stress from its cage mates. You've got no way. Just looking at the animal is not going to tell you anything about its ability to handle breeding, the kind of low level stress it may or may not have been under, whether it's been bossed around for the last 3 months by its cage mate, might not show up visually on a visual inspection on the animal, right? So there's so many factors to consider there. And if personally, I don't trust anybody else. Like, I just don't. Like, I haven't brought in new Euros into my collection except for a select number of wild caught babies, in order to make sure I have like a really diverse gene pool here. I haven't brought in new Euros from anybody in a long time, years, and it's going to stay that way. I'm not going to bring in anything here anymore. And that's not a statement about other people. That's a statement about the fact that the stakes are so high for me now that if something were to happen, like if I went out on a limb and bought an animal from, let's say, Matt out in New York. Matt's a buddy of mine. I love Matt. Great guy, wonderful human. But if he had something that he didn't know about in his collection, like a pathogen floating around that was just lying dormant in his animals, and then I brought one of those animals here and something happened, it's not on him, that's on me, right? Even if I went through the whole quarantine process, I just don't trust it. I don't want to do it. The stakes are too high. So that's kind of where I fall on that.
I bought a female from a guy. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
I bought a female from a guy like a few months ago. I think it was January. He was local. He's on Long Island. And I bought it from him. Beautiful, gorgeous, big green female. I brought her home. I quarantined her for 4 or 5 months. Mm-hmm. And she started showing signs of being gravid. And I'm looking at her, I'm like, is she gravid right now? Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, she was nesting one day, and I didn't set up a proper box for her. I had like moist sand, but it wasn't like a true nesting box. Mm-hmm. She had laid 20 eggs, mm-hmm. 14 of which were fertile. Mm-hmm. Every single one failed.
Yeah. Well, and
I was like, she's stressed out. She's new. She wasn't meant to breed. And the guy told me, oh, she had no cage mates. I didn't try breeding her. And I was like, well, evidently he lied. And I emailed him back. I was like, hey, you sure you were telling the truth there? He's like, oh yeah, I had a male with her. I'm like, oh, cool. Thanks for lying. So
right. Well, and okay. So I'm going to say this. I've got 1 minute left. So I'm going to say this, and then we're going to close out the meeting. And then if anybody has any more questions, just DM me. Okay. But I'm going to say that saying that they were fertile, you don't know. You have no idea if they were fertile or not. If they are puffy, if they have that big red ring on them, that doesn't mean anything at all. That could be anything. That could be blood vessels. We don't know if that's an actual embryo or not. We have no way of knowing. Now, if she was with a male, then they were probably fertile. But there's a big difference between fertile and viable. Those two things, that's the distinction I like to make. Were they viable or not? Because I don't care. Like, fertility is going to be evident if they hatch. They're obviously fertile, right? But viability doesn't care if they're fertile or not. And that's a more important metric in my mind. So, guys, I'm so sorry about letting my Zoom subscription lapse. That's my bad. If you guys have any questions, just message me, okay? But I'm going to close out the meeting now because I know it's about to end. So thank you all so much. I apologize. Thank you guys very much. Let's talk really soon, okay? Bye-bye, guys.